to, but it probably
helps.
helped. Hey everybody, I'm Ben
Hi.
Yee. I am the Secretary of the Manhattan Democratic Party and Democratic State Committeeman for the 66th Assembly District.
I'm Alyssa Stein. I'm a county committee person for
Yes.
Assembly District 66 Part A.
Yep.
And I'm secretary of that little grouping.
Yep.
And this is our third take on this video because we're going to do it for less than 10 minutes, damn it. Last take was 20.
Yeah, okay, well, let's not burn any more time. What are we talking about?
Today we're talking about the state committee meeting that you attended last week.
Yeah, that was
I know.
great.
I read a write-up that you did about it, and it sounded like it was a pretty farcical experience. Frustrating, not transparent, and it made me realize that there's a lot that I don't know about how state politics work.
Yes.
So quickly, super quickly, you are an elected state official to what?
Correct. So I am elected to this thing called the Democratic State Committee. I'm elected to a statewide organization. It's not the government. I am an elected official, but it's internal to the Democratic Party. There's a governing board that controls the state Democratic Party, how it spends its money on, or rather how it spends its money, who it supports, what Democrats are supposed to believe in. It makes up the party platform. And I'm elected to that body.
Okay.
Also, if you're interested in checking out the article I wrote, you can go to benjaminyee.com/blog. It's there. I'll put a link.
Yeah, it was a really interesting article. How is that state Democratic Party organized?
Right.
Like, who runs it? How does that person get to be in charge? Who does what?
Sure. So first let me break down how political parties work generally. This is Democrat, Republican, whatever. If you have a national party, you're going to have a national governing board that does federal level elections, that spends money on the presidency, coordinates Congress and Senate races, spends all that money. They have their own governing board. Every state has its own state party with its own state governing board that makes independent decisions for statewide elected offices and state legislature races and things like
so
this.
that's what you're doing.
And that's what I'm doing on the state committee.
Okay.
There's also a local committee.
we're not gonna talk
We're not
about
going to
that
talk
now.
about it, but there's 3 levels. I'm in the middle there.
Okay.
The folks who are in charge are elected by the state committee. So Democratic voters, if you're in New York, you get 2 for every assembly district. Democratic voters select those folks in the primary. We go to the state committee meetings and elect the leadership of the state party. There's a chair, a secretary, a treasurer, a sergeant at arms, and a bunch of vice chairs, which are right now unlimited and just sort of like selected, not at random, but for their connections.
So I'm gonna, but I'm gonna step back for a moment and say, you guys are elected at the state party level.
Yes.
On the primaries.
Right.
So the primaries are really important, and people have to understand
Yes.
it's important not just for the government elected people,
Yes.
like who's going to be running in that November election against Republicans,
Right.
but it's also really super important in people who are going to be governing the state Democratic Party.
Or any party that you're a member of.
Right, but that happens,
Yes.
so all on the primaries, it's both governmental
Yes.
primaries and
Right.
Democratic Party.
The definition of a primary is an
Got it.
internal election for a political party. So you choose the person who will represent your political party in the general election, and you're choosing the people who run your political party.
Okay, so now I know even more, as should you, how important it is to come out.
So
to vote
important.
So
It's
important.
like everything.
Every time I hear primaries, I realize there's another thing I didn't know, and it makes it even more important to participate.
Maybe you know everything now. Maybe.
I keep finding that I don't.
Well,
But
regardless. Questions?
Voting in primaries really matters. We got to how the party is structured. How does the state Democratic Party interact with government officials?
Right,
How
absolutely.
do those 2 parts work together?
So there's sort of 2 things that the state party does. The first is it sets out policy platform. So it's meant to be a driving force between the legislation that gets put forward by Democrats. Republican State Committee obviously does the same for their Republican legislators. And the other thing that the State Committee does is get involved in elections, right? It helps Democrats win, in theory. And it does this by raising lots and lots of money and spending lots and lots of money. And it also, the State Committee has the power to, if it endorses a candidate in a primary for statewide office, governor, comptroller, attorney general, that candidate doesn't have to petition. So it gives those people a gigantic leg up
that's
in a
huge.
primary situation.
So just so that I'm clear about this, the Democratic state party raises money to give to candidates.
Or spend in its own activities.
Right.
That help candidates.
That's separate from a candidate raising their own funds.
Correct.
So a candidate, if somebody's running for governor, they can raise money themselves. They can also get funds given to them by the state Democratic Party.
Correct. So in
Got
theory, having a state party that likes you, or being a good Democrat that adheres to the things that the state party
Like following
demands,
party lines.
right,
Right.
is beneficial for you as a candidate because you'll get resources, and that creates this dynamic in which the state party has influence over candidates and therefore over government.
Every layer you take off, it's fascinating. All right, so we're going to jump right into this meeting that you were at.
Oh,
Can you tell
baby.
us about, so this meeting sounded like it was frustrating from a getting new things introduced point of view. Can
Right.
you just give
For
us
a democratic, transparency, inclusive point of view, pretty
right, all
frustrating.
those kind of things that we're all fighting for.
One would hope. I guess
Well-
not everybody.
Right, one would hope, but apparently not necessarily people who actually are in charge
Hmm.
and have a say over these things. So quickly, what was the meeting?
Right.
And then what didn't happen that you were hoping would happen?
Right. So every 6 months, the state committee, we're meant to have a fall and a spring meeting as a mandatory sort of you got to do it thing. The last meeting was in August. That was the spring meeting, so it was very late. So we just had the fall meeting. Yes.
Okay.
Now, at the last meeting, there were 5 changes to the rules proposed, and 2 of them were actually passed, which was good. One of those gave us a much larger window for being informed about meetings. It used to be about 10 days. Oh, 10 days you got to go to Buffalo. Oh, in 10 days you got to go to whatever, some random place in New York State. Now we get 25 days, which makes
Much more reasonable.
our lives a lot easier,
Sure.
planning and such. But that meant that there were 3 rules changes that had not been voted on.
So super quickly, the last rules changes that came up at the last meeting, they were introduced, they were debated or whatever, and they were all voted on at that meeting and passed.
Well, just 2 of them. 2 of 5.
Right, so 2 of 5. So at least within that one meeting,
Yes.
something happened.
Correct.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We passed a couple of other resolutions as well. One that I had authored on Sanctuary State and such.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But so these 2 had passed. The remainder had been put off to the next meeting, and there was an agreement to convene a subcommittee to look at them. Now,
Hold on.
yep.
An agreement by whom and who was the subcommittee?
Between the state committee and the leadership of the party, the leadership of the state committee. So basically, the executive director, the chair, that board, that executive board, they agreed that they'd convene a subcommittee to look at these.
Okay, so all that happened at the August meeting.
Correct.
Like, hey, we're not ready to vote on this yet. We're going to convene a subcommittee.
Right.
We're going to discuss it and then bring it up at the next meeting.
Right.
So
Which
that's what happens at the meeting.
is great, except
Yeah.
that the subcommittee, which was convened, nobody was really informed about when it was meeting. We were not told who was on it. I had to ask at this next meeting. And as it turns out, there was at least one person who was on it who's not elected to the state committee. So,
Okay, stop right there. So,
Yeah.
somebody can serve on a subcommittee of the state party without actually being an elected official to the state party.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really have any idea. Apparently, yes. We'll see what happens in the next go
Let's
around.
just say, sounds like favoritism.
Yeah, definitely some of that.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Whatever.
So the subcommittee convened. Apparently, they had some conference calls. I guess they had no problem with the rules changes because they offered no suggestions. We were all told that we'd be voting on the rules as they had been submitted at the meeting last Monday.
Right.
And I arrived there, like so many other people, to vote on
1 minute.
Yes. Oh, to vote on something that we thought, would be important. And the executive committee meets before the state committee meeting. That's fine, whatever, they have to do it. And what they do is for everything on which the state committee will vote, they issue a recommendation. Now, they could have told the state committee, we like these, vote yes. They could have said, we don't like these for the following reason. We recommend, vote no. They could have even said, we recommend that you amend these with the following changes because they're okay, they just need to be tweaked. Instead, they recommended that we table this thing. And tabling is a sort of parliamentary technicality to get around debating them at all and just killing them.
So it's kind of like putting it in the closet, kind of closing the door and pretending it's not there.
Exactly. Now, in theory, or rather in reality, tabling just means we're going to put this off till later in the meeting, and anybody can say, I want to talk about this now. You can stand up and move to talk about the thing that you tabled, which means that if you want to use tabling to kill something, whoever's in charge of the meeting has to be really strict about who they let talk. They cannot let anybody who might be interested in debating these measures talk, because the minute they have the floor to speak, they can say, I want to bring back the things that we laid on the table. So it led to a meeting which was very tightly controlled.
I have to say, it sounds a little bit like Mean Girls in middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Even though I was never a mean girl and I know
I
nothing.
in no way was saying that you were.
Well,
But-
I did go to middle school, but having not been a girl and
Right.
not particularly mean, I
But just in
assumed
that,
from a movie.
sort of shunning.
Yes.
Making sure that somebody
Sure.
can participate and kind
Right.
of giving the cold shoulder or whatever. And
That's it.
pretending that they're not there, not letting them speak, and therefore not letting their proposal go anywhere.
Yeah, very much
Right.
like that.
Ooh.
So, I mean, I had a point of information, which was basically just a question, and they didn't really, it took me, 2 or 3 minutes of repeating, I have a question, to get them to even address the fact that I had a
That
question.
sounds so frustrating.
It was pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
There's another resolution that's coming up at the next meeting, which I actually authored, about transparency in the budget for the state committee, which I think is a critically important
Right.
topic, because right now much of the state party's power has to do with the money it spends, and the state committee has no way of knowing how it's spending that money.
Right. So we're going to talk about
yeah.
that. We're going to talk about that at another time.
Right. So all I meant
But
to say
back
was we'll
this
we'll see what happens next time.
So what ended up happening with these 3 resolutions that hadn't been resolved in August?
Oh, they died.
So they just died.
Yeah.
So they were tabled. They were put in the closet. The door was shut. Nobody had called on anybody to talk about it.
Right.
What were the resolutions?
One was to limit the number of vice chairs that can be added to the governing board, or not the governing board, to the executive board.
Right.
All these vice chairs on the executive board. The second one was to ensure that some number of the vice chairs were actually elected state committee members. Right now,
That
they can just be
seems
appointed
so
by
obvious,
anybody.
Right.
Yeah. And the third was to make it so that the executive director, who's one of the few paid staffers that operates the party, that the executive director needs to be approved by the state committee as a whole. So they're appointed by the chair, and then this would require that the state committee as a whole approve that.
It seems so
appointment.
obvious that that's the way that it should be, but okay.
These
so now,
resolutions could be brought back. They could be reintroduced.
how would that happen?
Somebody who wanted to introduce them would have to gather 10 signatures from 10 state committee members and then submit them again so they could be placed on the agenda. To be fair, there were some tweaks that I thought would make sense based on critiques that the executive board had of these amendments.
Right.
But since there was no debate, there was no way to discuss this. They were just like, these are bad because we think they're bad and now we're going to kill them. What we should be doing is debating
Of
the
course.
best way to run our party.
So that leaves me with this. It seems like there's important change that can happen on every level. What do involved, concerned citizens do to make change happen?
Find out who your state committee member is and vote in primaries. Make sure that the people that you're electing to go represent you in the state party are actually doing representation.
That sounds like a good solution. It sounds like there's a lot that can be done. There seems like
Absolutely.
a lot that doesn't really work very well yet, but there is a possibility of change. It's just going to take people really pounding on doors and not letting people get away with what they've been getting away
You
with.
have to hold your elected representatives accountable, and so much of that happens in the primary. So if you live in New York, for example, our state committee is elected next year, 2018, by assembly district. So make sure you vote in that primary. It will be critically important.
Okay, well, we shaved 6 minutes off from our last go round. Yes. All right, we'll see you next time.
Laters.
Later.